this episode of Supervision Simplified. I'm Dr. Amy Parks, and I'm really excited to have a Texan here with us today. I am welcoming Doan Pham, who is a licensed clinical social worker in Houston, Texas. And we're excited to have you, Doan. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, we're here on a Sunday morning talking about supervision. So, like some people just talk about supervision all the time, which is really sad. Um, but anyway, we're going to be talking about supervision today because Doan had asked a question in a Facebook group specifically about like not just becoming a supervisor because you're already a supervisor, but how to like conduct supervision. And I thought, let's bring you in, let's bring our audience into this conversation to talk a little bit more about the process of conducting supervision as a new supervisor. So first, before we sort of dive into that, and thank you so much for giving us a brain dump of questions. So that can be really helpful. Tell us how you became a clinician. Like, tell us your sort of career journey.
Sure. I actually fell into social work completely accidentally. When I was in college, in my junior year, my advisor put me in the wrong class. She was supposed to put me in sociology, and she put me in social work, which I had never heard of before in my life. I didn't even know what social work was. So I was very confused on the first day of class when I like showed up at the social work building, and I'm like, what is this? Um,
But
but
you didn't
funny
drop. You didn't drop it.
No, I didn't. Actually, funny enough, the first day of class was like the first time I felt at home, actually. Because that first class, I don't know how to describe the feeling, but it just felt like everything finally made sense. Like my career choice, like my future just made sense. Like I was like, this is exactly where I was supposed to be. Um,
Wow. Where did
just
you go to
leading
school? Where was your grad school?
Yeah, I was at the University of Texas
Okay.
in
Got it.
Austin.
Got it.
Yeah, so because I was like struggling, my parents really wanted me to go to medical school. I was on track to go to medical school, but that class shifted everything for me.
You're
So
like,
then
oh, she was going to be rich and now she's going
you
to be
know,
poor.
basically there was a grieving process for my parents, but I think ultimately they were really happy because they didn't know what it was either. So the more that they learned about it, the more I think they were able to support me. So yeah, that's kind of how I got started. So I did a lot of nonprofit work for a while. Um, at some point I tried the medical social work thing and realized it was definitely not for me.
That's interesting.
Um, yeah, and so I've really been in lots of different spaces. Um, and ultimately started private practice in 2018. So it's been about 6 years since I've been, yeah, in private practice, and I really love it, and I feel like this is like what I was like meant to do.
And what are your specialties in Houston? What are
Sure.
the kinds of audiences or, clients that you work with?
Yeah, so I work with a lot of um clients that have cultural issues, um, generational trauma,
Mm.
interpersonal violence trauma, right? Grief and loss. So I do a lot. Basically, my work starting out was in the nonprofit sector, and I did a lot of work around like domestic violence, interpersonal violence.
Hmm.
Um, and it really stuck with me, and that's like pretty much a lot of the work that I do discusses like attachment and healthy relationships, and also just processing like generational issues that happen within families. So primarily I serve, people who um are people of color, or they have like relationship issues or grief and loss. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. And so as you have navigated private practice, do you have any associates or anybody that works with you in addition to you?
No, it's
Okay.
just me.
And so then in your journey, what made you decide, okay, well, now I want to actually sort of be generative and do this supervision thing?
So I
Because that's
believe
like a big shift.
it is. It is. I think for me, it's always been something I really loved and enjoyed because before I even became an LCSW, um, when I was doing nonprofit work, I was actually supervising other coworkers just because like in the nonprofit world, like you wear like a million hats, right?
Right, right.
And people like leave, and so you have to like fill in their shoes. Um, and so at some point, while I was actually getting clinical supervision, I ended up having to supervise an entire direct service team,
Wow.
um, which was like, I think at the time, I'm trying to remember, it was 6 to 8 people. So
Wow.
so at the time, I was like, I really enjoyed that part of my day, because I had a really special relationship with each of my coworkers, and it was just something I really loved and enjoyed doing, and I had interns on top of that too, who were social work
Wow.
interns.
Yeah. That's like
Um
it, and each supervisee is like another case. So it's like
Yes.
a huge caseload. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I
Wow.
know, I was juggling a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. That is a lot. Wow.
Yeah, so I really loved that, and so, I remember not long after I had my LMSW, license, I really thought about investing in getting, my license to be a supervisor,
Hmm.
but the course that I had did, to be honest, did not give me a ton of clarity of, like, what it means to be a supervisor. How do you become a supervisor? I felt like it was very theoretical, so by the time I finished, then I felt like it was just overwhelming, and then I just didn't pursue it after that. So it's
Mm.
been 4 years since I've had my license, and I haven't actually pursued supervision, yeah.
Okay. So before we launch into sort of the nuts and bolts, tell me about your experience as a supervisee. So what sort of were the things that stood out as positive? And we're not trying to throw any
Oh,
supervision
sure.
or supervisor under the bus, but there are definitely great supervisors, and then there are definitely supervisors that we would wish and hope could become better. So, are
Sure.
there things that stood out that were great, and then things that maybe you wish maybe went differently in your own supervision?
Yeah, sure. My, supervisor, I think, had a really great she had a wealth of knowledge, which I thought was
About
really
the
helpful
field, about
about the field, about,
okay,
like, she at that point, I think she had written a book, she had been in a practice for a very long time, um, she understood grief and loss, like, significantly, and the way that it was set up in my supervision, so I actually had 2 supervisors. My first one starting off, it was a bad fit. Like, it
mm,
ended up we I ended up switching after, like, 2 months,
mm-hmm.
basically.
Okay.
But my
And by
second
bad
supervisor.
fit, what was the bad fit part?
Sure. She was pretty disorganized, to be honest, so I would show up on time, and she only did group. She didn't do any individual, it was all group. So me and the other supervisees would be waiting for her, and, our time's,
Yeah,
like, ticking, right? And we would be
right.
sitting there waiting for her, and then she would show up, and as soon as we sit down, she'd be like, "Okay, what do you guys wanna talk about?" And then
Oh,
it would just, like, there was no direction. Um,
mm,
it felt like us supervisees were leading everything and trying to
mm,
get support from each other, which is fine too, right? Like,
mm-hmm,
I think that's
mm-hmm,
the great thing about group.
mm-hmm.
But I think that as a supervisor, I just did not feel supported. She was really nice though, that's the thing. So it was a hard decision, but ultimately I knew I needed something more structured. So when I found my second supervisor, I liked that she like made sure to interview us before to make sure we were a good fit for group. Um, and we would do a combination of two groups and one individual session every month, and I thought that one individual session was helpful. So the positive was that I actually made some really long-lasting friends in that group, so it was a really good fit that we have always been supportive of each other since then. Um, And I think that she was like, I felt secure in knowing that she was going to be able to turn in my paper, like help me with paperwork, with the technical things. I didn't stress about it because she made it really easy for me. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's awesome. So, so in your training to become a supervisor, you received a lot of sort of theoretical training around the art of supervision, sort of
Yes.
the foundational tenets and theories of supervision, sort of how to provide that kind of leadership, that kind of
Yeah.
teaching, that kind of consultation, etc., and the models that have been sort of developed around supervision. But now you're thinking, okay, well, that's all great and helpful, but what is the nitty gritty of what I actually need to do?
Yeah.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
because it's because that's all really great when you're actually in the room, but you actually need to get people in the room. And so
Yeah.
one of the things you were saying was like, how do you get started with providing supervision? So obviously you're already listed on the Texas list of LCSW supervisors. So in
Yeah.
Texas, they have an LCSW -S designation. Um, so for context, so I am a supervisor in Virginia. In
Mm.
Virginia, we don't actually have that designation. Every state in the country does things differently
Oh,
because
interesting.
we like to have it be a problem. We like this problem. We apparently like to create complexity.
Yeah.
And part of that problem, Doan, that complexity is the problem.
Mm.
And one of the things that I might bang my drum a couple times during our conversation, because one of the reasons why I created the clinical supervision directory is to take the complexity out of this issue. But anyway, but you do have that designation. So you, of course, number one, want to make sure it's on all of your paperwork that
Mm.
you're a clinical supervisor in the state of
Yeah.
Texas and blah, blah, blah. So it's showing up everywhere. And of course, in whatever professional associations you're a part of, you want to make sure you're showing up on those lists. One of the challenges you were saying is, well, so I was telling you when we were, um, before we started talking that in August of this year, the date is August 5th, 2024. And I can put a copy of this ad in the show notes, but I mean, in this article in the show notes, but in US News and World Report, there was an article actually about Texas, and the article is titled "How a Lack of Supervisors Keep New Mental Health Workers from Entering the Field," and it's about Texas. And it's not just, however, about Texas. This is a nationwide problem. But the actual article is um, about Texas because uh, it's oriented around something about your somebody in Texas that went to the health center, and they sort of started this article and started the conversation,
Mm.
and how people are baffled by how difficult it is to find supervision or to find support in the state of Texas because there's such a challenge. So some of the
Mm.
statistics post COVID um, were that there's a real, of course, like everywhere across the country, there's a huge goal to improve access to mental health services,
Yeah.
but if we don't have access to supervision, then we don't get boots on the ground in a professional way, in a way that is is quick, that's efficient, and gets people moving along. You have 24 to 48 months to become licensed in Texas. That's pretty quick if you get the right supervisor. So that shouldn't really be that difficult. But as of
Mm.
June in 2024, there were 6,802 supervisors for LPCs, 3,871 supervisors for LCSWs, and 868 marriage and family therapist supervisors in Texas. And that's actually an increase of over 400 supervisors since 2022. But the article goes on to ask, so what's the problem? And actually, the question this article asks what the problem is that supervisees can't find supervisors that actually, if number one, they can't find them. And number two, they can't find supervisors that actually want to continue to supervise for a couple different reasons. So, one of the reasons why it's difficult to find supervisors is because the lists are so inadequate. So if there's a list of supervisors, it only just tells people your name and maybe your email address and maybe your zip code. And in a state like Texas, it's a huge state. So how do you even know where that supervisor is? And so you need to know a lot more about the state of Texas to figure out if Doan Pham lives even remotely near me to be able to supervise me. And then you actually have to be able to, as a clinician, weed through all of your emails to actually receive that email inquiry from that supervisee. But also, listen to this. Think about when you were a new graduate. How hard might it be for you to send a cold email to a random clinician saying, would you be willing to supervise me? Like you have been doing this work for all these years and you're on this list, and would you supervise me? Like, that's not an easy ask. And then to get a no after no after no, like that's another challenge, because there are a lot of people that, as you articulated, have 6 or 8 or 10 supervisees already. Well, that's a pretty huge caseload. So we, despite the fact that there look like or sound like large numbers of supervisors, there aren't enough to go around, because we're graduating, thankfully, thousands of people that want to go into mental health, but they have to be able to access a system of supervisors who are ready and willing and professionally trained with not only the theory, but with the practical knowledge of how to get them started.
Yeah.
And so now you have been around for 4 whole years and we haven't even gotten you started. So I am determined that Monday morning you are going to be supervising, darn it.
That's the goal.
All right. So getting started providing supervision, tell me some of the things that you feel like you have done that have worked or not worked, because you're not supervising anyone currently, correct?
No, I'm not. Yeah.
Okay. So tell me what do you feel like hasn't worked for you then? Because it sounds like you're not getting any inquiries. You're not nobody's really reaching out to you.
Yeah. I think, to be honest, it was probably of my own making, because I wasn't necessarily advertising that I was supervising at all. It wasn't even that long ago that I added the clinical supervision part to my website.
Okay, that's okay. Right, so these are all learning things that you have to figure out, right?
Right. Yeah, I think a part of me was trying to avoid it because I was intimidated by the process. Like, okay, well, I feel very comfortable with supervising a person, right?
Right.
But I want to make sure that the logistical legal part of it is taken care of, so that doesn't intimidate me into not doing it. I think
right.
that
So if
was
someone reaches out to me, I don't know what I'm doing. So then if they reach out to me, I might mess them up. So that would be really bad. Right. All right.
Yeah.
All right. So you've completed the supervision training, and you know that a supervisee has to complete 100 hours in the state of Texas, and it's different in every state. But in the state of Texas, an LCSW has to complete 100 hours of supervised training, and within 24 to 48 months, right? And 3,000 hours of supervised practice. So if they're working full time, they have to be working at least 30 hours a week. And if they're working part time, they have to work 15. And this information is on the Texas Behavioral Health Executive Council Board site. They have a pretty extensive site with a lot of FAQs. So all of that information is there and is available to you, to me, to everybody. So that's information that's available. So that sounds like one of the, and I I'm going to say pretty confidently, I didn't see anything on the board site that said this was required. But certainly, if anyone from I know we have a lot of listeners from Texas. If anyone from Texas wants to comment in the comments, they can tell us if a contract is required. I'm going to tell you that a contract is required because a contract is required. But some states don't care if you have a contract or not. I would strongly recommend that the very first thing you do when you have an inquiry, we can go back in a minute to how to get inquiries, but when you have an inquiry and you decide you're going to supervise someone, the first thing you do is you interview them and you make sure they are going to work with you and you're going to work with them. So if they meet your professional requirements of somebody that you want to mentor for 100 hours, you're going to meet them 100 times. Are you going to be able to deal with them for 100 times? Are you going to like them? Are they going to like you? Can you give them anything? Do they meet your, are they interested in the things that you're interested in? Can you actually guide them in the areas that they're professionally curious about? Are they open to feedback? You're going to want to ask yourself all of those questions. Are they open to consultation? Are they open to expanding their areas of curiosity? Because there are going to be times when you say, that may be something that you need to learn more about or explore more about in order to understand. So those are some of the early sort of questions you're going to ask. But the very first thing you want to do after you've established that you're going to have a relationship is sign a contract. And so we have a paperwork package on the Clinical Supervision Directory website where you have a contract, you have the how to build a relationship, some of the expectations for the supervisor, for the supervisee. And those are the things that really spell out. It's kind of like informed consent with your client. They spell out how we're going to do things. Who's keeping track of the hours? What happens in the case of an emergency? If you have a client that's suicidal, what are you supposed to do? How are you supposed to notify me? If you get called into court, you get a subpoena, what are you supposed to do? How is billing done? In different states, things are different throughout the US. So in some states allow unlicensed clinicians to actually do their own billing. Now, I don't believe that that's true in Texas. I believe in Texas clinicians aren't allowed to have aren't allowed to have their own private practice, but that could be the case. I have to look more at those regulations to see. But how is the billing how does billing to clients take place? And then how does billing for supervision take place? Are you actually charging this clinician, or are they actually going to work for you? Are they going to be an employee of yours, or are they working in their own capacity somewhere else and you're just supervising their time? So those are a couple of the big kinds of questions that you want to ask. And a lot of times what I know people do is, if you're not interested in bringing on associates, what you might do is you might start by talking to group practices in your area who oftentimes have residents but can't manage all of the supervision of them. And so you can say, hey, would you be interested in hiring me as a contract supervisor? I'm happy to supervise your clinicians. I can come on site. They can come see me. We can do virtual. Texas does allow virtual supervision. And so, again, that's another state by state thing. Not every state allows virtual supervision, and some states have different requirements for that. But they might be willing to have you come on as a contractor to supervise their individuals, their people. So one of the things you're saying that happened from the beginning was you weren't really telling people that you were supervising. So that's a good start, is telling people that you're supervising. So well done.
Yeah.
So I definitely get that out there. Also, make sure that the board has you listed on their list, because even as inadequate as it may be, you need to make sure that you're on that list.
I think I am.
Okay.
Unless I know I'm on a list, but I cannot remember if it was the board one or if it's like a more informal list of supervisors. The supervisors. I need
A
to
lot of
check
people are
again.
really afraid to Google themselves. They're super afraid to Google and see where they are in the world. But I would strongly suggest you go on the board website and pull up the
Okay.
list and see if you're on there.
Okay.
Because if you're not on there, you need to find yourself. And if you are on there, you need to make sure it's correct because they're only humans making that list. They could have easily spelled your name wrong, put your
Yeah.
email address wrong, some other thing wrong. So the state of Virginia, God love them, they have a list, and I know for a fact there's 2 people on there that are not even alive anymore.
Oh my goodness.
And
Yeah.
I had to send them a notice, and I'm like, I know you try to keep this updated, and it's really very challenging. And these people are just recently deceased, so they need to be removed from this list. And of course, they didn't know because
Yeah.
who sends a
Right,
death
right.
notice to the board, right? I mean, it happens. But
Yeah, yeah.
so that would be the very first thing I would do for sure.
Okay.
So that would be a great place to start. And then okay, so those would be the first sort of basic things to be doing.
Mhm.
And then there's kind of a next level of things. So you're near a few universities. First of all, the university that you went to, and then secondarily, the universities that are nearby you proximity wise.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would just go to ChatGPT, have
Yeah.
ChatGPT make you a little introductory email, telling a little bit, give it your resume, and have it make an introductory email telling a little bit about what you do and that you're available for supervision, and
Mm.
send an email to the director of those counseling programs saying, hey, if you have any students that are graduating and are looking for supervision, I went to your school and I would love to either come and talk to your students about the process of licensure, or if you don't feel confident talking about that, then you can say, I'd love to come and talk about private practice. And if you don't feel confident doing that or comfortable doing that, just say, hey, I'm available.
Mhm.
So if anyone's looking for supervision, I don't want them sitting on their parents' couches as soon as they graduate. I want them to get supervised. So let me know. I'm happy to be available. So a lot of people also use there are some services, well, a service specifically that contracts supervisors to supervise clinicians in the US. It's called Motivo, and
Mo
Motivo. And Motivo is a great employment engine for supervisors.
Oh, okay.
And Motivo is a great friend of the clinical supervision directory. And Motivo contracts supervisors to supervise clinicians. So you work for Motivo and you supervise through them. So that's
Oh.
another sort of opportunity. And then, of course, the clinical supervision directory, which is a nationwide one-stop URL, and people when they graduate from their graduate school program, they can put in their name and their state, and then they are directed to all the clinical supervisors that are available in their state. So it's essentially the Tinder of supervision without any dating.
Yeah.
So, and they can just say, okay, well, I like Doan, I like Amy, and I like John. I'm going to
Mm.
send emails to all 3 of those people and see who responds. And the email goes straight through the clinical supervision directory to the supervisor, and then the supervisor can respond. But the other thing
Mm.
that's neat about the CSD is that if you're a supervisor in there, every time a new supervision seeker from Texas is looking for someone, you get a message.
Mm.
So it says, hey, there's a new supervision seeker in Texas. And vice versa. Every time someone joins as a supervisor in Texas, every supervision seeker, every single one, and we have thousands,
Mhm.
every single one, we say, hey, there's a new supervisor in Texas. So if
Mm.
they're in a situation like you were in, and they say, this supervision relationship isn't working so well, I need
Yeah.
somebody new, they get a notice and they go, oh, I could maybe look in the directory again and find somebody new.
Yeah.
So for
Yeah.
supervision seekers, it's free. And for supervisors, there's a fee for being in the directory, but the fee is pretty low cost compared to the ROI.
Mm. I was just
So
about to ask about that.
yeah,
Sorry to
yeah.
interrupt. I was gonna ask about like for Motivo or for the directory, is there like a membership you pay or like how does that work?
So not for Motivo, and I'm happy to. We should have Motivo as a sponsor for the podcast. I'm going to
Yeah.
reach out to the owner there. But Motivo, they pay you as a contractor,
Oh, I see.
and for the directory is just a service. The directory is
Mhm.
designed as my legacy. I own it. It's my legacy. It's designed as a service to our community. So the
Yeah.
only fee is for the clinician, the supervisor to be listed in the directory. So your directory listing has your photo, has your bio that you've written yourself, a map to your office, your fees, anything specific about you, way more than just a list.
Mm.
It has a lot more information about you. It has a link to all your social media. It has a link to your website. And it has this opportunity for people to directly link, email you directly. And so it's kind of like a mini website for just for
Mm.
supervision.
I
And then
see.
it's also a community for supervisors. So we meet monthly.
Oh,
We have a
okay.
Facebook group. We have CEs for supervisors for ongoing training and things like that. So, which is part of your membership. So it's a little bit of a different type of thing, but it's a community for supervisors versus Motivo. And so one of the things you talked about how to get started in supervision, it's designed to sort of help answer those questions. And so that's important. And one of the other things that you asked, so you said like, how do I find supervisees? So we've talked about kind of a couple things, and I think reaching out to your universities is a really good one. Making sure all of your name and everything lists that you're a supervisor. Um, the documents that you're responsible for. So I talked about you're not really necessarily, depending on your state, responsible for a contract, but I strongly recommend it, just like informed consent. Strongly
Yeah.
recommend having that. Now, you are not necessarily responsible for the paperwork that your supervisee has to turn in, but you are. Because at the end of the day, you're signing off on their paperwork. So you want to have a really clear understanding, having gone through it yourself, a clear understanding of the paperwork that they have to complete. So I'd
Yeah.
recommend you download all the paperwork, make sure you're current on it, all of that stuff. But
Yeah.
the onus of paperwork is on the supervisee, and you make it very clear. Look, you're keeping track of your hours. I'm just taking notes of each clinical session. And so what I recommend is you use your patient EHR for supervisees. You
Oh,
just
okay.
make them a client or a patient in your EHR. And each time you meet with them, you take a short clinical note, like a little DAP note or something about the contents of the session. And then you have a record of when you met, you know, have them put their credit card if they're paying you through your EHR. Just do it all just like a patient. It's just much easier. Keep track of it just that way. And you have a full set of notes. There are no guidelines specific to supervision notes, but you should have a clinical note for every supervision session.
Mm.
There should be a brief clinical note that talks about, uh, you know, who you talked about or what topics you touched on. What are some things you're going to be thinking about going forward? And in your development of your contract, you're going to be also talking about goal setting. So you're going to be talking about in your notes, like how you're going to be setting goals going forward. Because your supervisee goals might be like this, but you as
Mhm.
a clinician know that they might need to be a bit wider.
Mm.
So you asked about charging. Um, it varies tremendously,
Yeah.
especially in social work, because you know how social workers are. You like to give a lot of things away for free. God love you. But
Yeah.
the range nationally is anywhere from $75 to $200.
Mm.
So you need to think of how in your area, what makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, So you'd have to kind of figure that out. I would Google around and find out what other people's supervision fees are in your area. If you have a local social work group, you could ask in their Facebook group and see, what are people charging for supervision. But, I think 75 to $100 an hour feels really super, usually pretty nice to me. And then you can also offer group supervision at a sometimes more approachable price for people. So
Yeah.
I really love group. Like you said, group, it can be really, really powerful.
Yeah.
I think being an individual and group is really good.
Mhm. Mhm.
So Texas doesn't delineate between individual and group, but some states do. So I would want to double dip if I were a
Yeah.
supervisee.
Yeah. For sure.
So um you asked about the technical process from start to finish with a supervisee. So, I think in terms of technical process, we talked about contract, we talked about goal setting, keeping up with paperwork, and then, holding the space for accountability as well. Making sure your supervisee is showing up, signing off on their notes, because
Mhm.
not, you know, you don't necessarily need to sign off on notes, but
Yeah.
you need to be reviewing their notes. A lot of supervisors don't do that. And I believe
Mhm.
that you should be, because a lot of, well, I would talk to whoever they're working for about that. I would have a conversation about who they're working for, about what your responsibility is to their notes, because who they're working for, their clinical director or someone else may be reviewing their notes. But
Yeah.
a lot of clinicians don't learn about notes, and they have to learn them from their supervisor.
Mhm.
Um, in terms of other technical processes, sometimes supervisors have a curriculum and they work through some of the things that maybe you learned in your course. They work through, um, from beginning to end, things like countertransference and transference. They work through understanding different counseling theories and how they relate directly to the clinician's work. You can do that if that feels good for you. If that's the way, if you're a process oriented type of clinician, that might be good for you. It might be better for you to do more person centered, where you're meeting the clinician, the supervisee where they are, and having sort of set a guiding framework based on their goals as to where they, want to go. I heard you say, like, you don't necessarily want them to just show up and be in charge and just like, so what do you want to talk about today? But
Hmm.
I would set the expectation that it is their time.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
So yeah, so like I expect you to come with a case consultation, and here's what the case consultation framework looks like. And we
Yeah.
have a case consultation framework on the website. But like, this is what I expect you to be able to tell me. And then, then what do you expect from me? And go from there. How does that feel?
No, it's good. Actually, I don't have a problem with like processing or anything like that. For me, it was like during my own supervision, the supervisor was just not present. Like it just
Right.
felt like they weren't even there, you know? That's the reason why it felt like, okay, we kind of need to fend for ourselves here.
Right.
Like that felt um uh I guess like insecure or unstable,
Right.
however you want to describe it. But yeah, the great thing about my supervisor that I ended up staying with was that she just allowed us to like, okay, this is like what's really bothering me right now, and then we'll process it as a group or individually. So I appreciate she always made space for
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing I would add, to sort of the responsible, things that, process start to finish and things that you were asking about, is I would add a video component. Require your
Mm,
supervisee to record themselves in session a couple different times during your work together. So if you're doing 100 hours of supervision, I would require at least 4 videos. So
mm,
one every 25 hours of work. And then review that together in supervision, because you need to be able to see what they're doing and that they're doing it with some level of fidelity, because it's
mm,
just important for you to have that faith. I mean, this is a person who's working under your license. And in the
yeah,
US World News and World Report article, that was the biggest drawback for people to want to be in supervision, was the fear of people working under their license. And from my perspective, the only reason why you should fear people working under your license is if you don't know them. if you don't do the work to know what they're doing. And
Yeah.
so don't do that. Don't be in the dark about what they're doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
That
so
makes sense.
require them to do video every 25 sessions. I don't think that that's too much to ask at all.
Mm.
And then you're going to be sure that you have or it's that's every 25 sessions, but they're doing 3,000 hours of direct work. So you could say if they're doing 3,000 hours of direct work, every 100 hours they have to do a video.
Mm.
Then you're going to get 30 videos. I mean, that's a whole lot. Maybe every 200 hours. I mean, that's a whole lot of videos.
Yeah.
But I think that could be really pretty amazing learning for both you and for your clinician. So you can talk about how that could work. And then you can also process those videos, some of them in group as well. I mean, they've done it in grad school. I guarantee they've done it in grad school. So it's
Oh,
not
yeah.
like a
I
secret.
remember those days.
Yes, exactly.
The live role plays, yeah.
Exactly. Um, the last question you had here is, what are some concerns worth preparing for? So I would say, a situation where the top things I would say are a situation where a clinician acts unethically, and you have to get involved with the board, or you have to get involved in an ethical scenario.
Mm.
And the best way to prepare for that is to have a full-on open conversation when you start
Yeah.
about, this is how this is going to work, and this is how we're going to conduct ourselves. And if there's ever any impropriety, or there's ever a question of ethics, we're going to meet and we're going to decide how to move forward.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that's number one. I think preparing for, and you would do this in your contract, preparing for an emergency, whether the clinician has an emergency, you have an emergency, the client has an emergency, any emergencies happen of any sort.
Yeah.
Preparing for those, preparing for court, any kind of
Mhm.
court related situations, because most likely if your supervisees called to court, you are also called to court. So preparing for those kinds of scenarios. And then the other thing that is probably the most important one is preparing for countertransference, both
Mhm.
between you and the supervisee, but also for the supervisee and their clients. Because what I've experienced is the most of my supervisees come into supervision absolutely 100% confident that they've done all their own personal work, and that
Yeah.
they will have no problem with countertransference whatsoever. They have no issue whatsoever. They're ready. And I 100% want to support that. And they're always wrong.
Yeah.
It's okay. That's like totally being human. I expect that. And I say that to them usually in our first, couple sessions. Like, that's to be
Mhm.
expected, that you don't know what you're going to confront until you're there. So I would
That's
prepare for, those are probably the four things I would prepare
Mhm.
for, um,
Okay.
to get started. And then we've already talked about how it's like having another case. It's like having another client, because it's a lot to manage. You're not only in that 1 hour, but you're reviewing their notes. You're doing a lot of other things. You're thinking about them too, like outside of
Oh, yeah.
session. You're thinking about them.
Yeah, that's true.
Anything else you can think of that I can answer for you today, or anything that's come up from our conversation that now makes you think, are you more ready now to dive in, or what do you think?
Yes, I am. No, I think you gave me a lot of really great information. The contract is definitely something that I need to look more into.
Mm-hmm.
You bringing up the point about like reaching out to group practices. I think that's a really good point because a lot of people who start out in group practices are probably looking for clinical experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
or they are looking for clinical experience. Um, so it makes me think like that might be a great place to, yeah, put my name out there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, getting back in touch with like, where I graduated from or schools around here as
Mm-hmm.
well. because I do have a relationship with staff at UT.
Perfect.
And they've been telling me you should do this. So now I can finally tell them, okay, like I'm
I'm ready.
ready to do this. So
Well, as soon as the first person calls you to set up, to become a
yeah,
supervisee, then call me and be like, okay, Amy, now what do I do?
yeah, yeah,
It'll be like a Cyrano de Bergerac. I'll like talk to you from the back end. Okay, now say this.
yeah.
Now say this. You'll be ready. It'll be fine.
Like a little angel on my shoulder tells you what to
Absolutely. Happy to do it. Here's the most important thing is that we there are two things. Number one, that we continue to support supervisors because
do.
supervisors are critical to our profession. If
Oh yeah,
supervisors aren't well supported, our whole profession is going to break down
yeah,
because they are the reason why we can continue to license clinicians. And
yeah.
so our associations have to have a mandate to support supervisors. And the second thing is, I also believe really strongly that supervisors as a community need to work together to support one another. So anything
Mm.
that I can do to support you as a supervisor, I am all about it. Supervision is truly my legacy, and anything I can do to help you become a better supervisor, help you to get more supervisees, help you to grow and connect with other supervisors. I know plenty of people in Texas, so happy to make those connections for you, and happy to
Yeah,
help you figure things out. So we'll
I
get you
appreciate that.
rolling.
Yes, I'm looking forward to it. I feel like I have more of an understanding, and what to expect. So this was really helpful.
Good. I'm so glad. Well, Doan, thank you so much for joining us on Supervision Simplified. And if
Yes.
anyone has questions about supervision or wants to walk through the supervision, I don't know, 411 exercise with me, or now they can do it with Doan. So she can give you all the information now. We're just past the buck. But feel free
Yeah.
to reach out to us. And if you have any questions about Texas or any other states or how supervision is done throughout the United States, please feel free to reach out to us at the Clinical Supervision Directory or put a note in the comments below, and we'll be happy to give you more information. Feel free to subscribe to Supervision Simplified and share it with your friends. And the revolution starts here. Keep simplifying your supervision game. Have a great day. Bye.